human is given a lawful order within a war, then the human's not really morally responsible for killing whatever enemy person comes up. They call this the moral equality of combatants, is you don't blame the grunts in the front line for killing each other. You blame the political powers that be that give the orders. So the chain of command and the responsibility really remains with the commanders. If they made a mistake in their targeting, such as has been alleged in that recent attack on a Iranian Revolutionary Guard base, which had a primary school right next to it, apparently. So that would be somebody's responsibility, and that would be the general who gave the order to strike that base and might have been negligent in the intelligence. Or I wouldn't blame the drone for that. I would blame the humans for that. To me, I would make a distinction between the policy and the action. And the more important is who's responsible for the policy that the drone is following.
When we talk about digital divides, I worry that the gap between people using it as an answer engine versus using it to help provide you with better thinking, that's going to be the problem.
We need to understand always what the funding model is and what is the political system behind any tool that our kids are using.
AI is not some machine god somewhere up in the sky. It's a physical building on someone else's land, drinking up someone's water.
You can make a robot to sort of be anthropomorphically credible. People, when they have a conversation with it, they think there's a human mind behind it.
What if virtual reality can be our training platform where we can interact with others without actually hurting them?
And we're now at this next sort of inflection point where perhaps the systems that we're trying to produce are going to take over the decision to commission violence in the first place.
It's not a technology problem, it's a leadership problem right now.
It's one thing to overcome death for human beings, but we're dealing with an age of AI where maybe it won't even be human beings that conquer death. It'll be sort of like AI that takes over the world.
What kind of society do we want AI to help us build? Because if we don't answer that intentionally, these other forces are going to answer it for us.
Welcome to a new season of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season, we're exploring empathy in the era of AI. Together with my expert guests, we dive into armed conflict, ed tech, neocolonialism, transhumanism, online abuse, the future of work, and so much more. You don't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button now. And if you like what you hear, post a comment and share the show. Hi, there's a lot of noise about AI right now. Predictions and promises and so many warnings. It's really hard to make sense of it all. I've spent the past 15 years studying empathy, and what I want to know is how will AI impact how we treat one another? So I decided to speak with a variety of AI experts, and the result is this 25-part series exploring how artificial intelligence will reshape our relationships and society. There is a ton at stake, so I hope you'll join me on this learning journey. Today, my guest is Dr. Sean Welsh, a philosopher, AI ethicist, and author whose work explores moral decision-making in robots and the ethical future of human-machine relationships. In this conversation, we explore what happens when humans form deep emotional bonds with machines that may feel nothing in return. Why ethical decision-making in AI is no longer a theoretical issue, but one already shaping courts and hospitals, workplaces, and geopolitics. Whether AI will widen inequality and social disconnection or become a powerful force for human flourishing and opportunity. And of course, we'll talk about whether or not robots and AI systems can ever be genuinely conscious and genuinely empathic. If you want to understand how AI may transform morality and what it means to be human in a world full of anthropomorphic robots, this show is for you.
So welcome to the show, Sean. I'm so happy to meet you.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I'm recording this after dinner. I think you've just had breakfast on your side of the planet. Is that right?
Just what? Yes, I have had a bowl of muesli and a cup of coffee, so I'm conscious. I have a saying, no coffee, no code. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm still making my way through the second one of the day at 7 p.m. I want to ask a question at the onset. So impressive bio, but I wonder for listeners and viewers who may want to just a little minor glimpse into who Sean is outside of all of those accolades. Like, who are you and why are you so passionate about the work that you do?
I was surprised by when you refer to my bio as impressive. I usually think of it, we Australians are somewhat more blunt than Canadians, as a dog's breakfast, which is an Australian colloquialism, which basically means a complete, utter shambolic mess with no plan or structure whatsoever. Because, I've done all this crazy stuff, as you know. I've worked in I started off going to uni, being an accountant. I think I might have airbrushed that off the CV. And just wandered around doing this and that, and eventually sort of fell into IT in my early 30s after I'd done a philosophy degree and taught English and all sorts of things, and ended up doing a PhD in machine ethics. So, I sort of wandered around, but I was curious from the get-go. Like my mother used to love telling this story when I was 3, and she'd take us to the beer garden just down the road in Surfers Paradise. And I was a great baby or toddler. She could just put me down in a little chair, give me a comic and a bottle of pop, and I was happy and quiet for the hours that Mum and Dad would spend, in the beer garden. So I started off reading very young, and I've always been curious. I just read and read and read. So I think that's my defining characteristic is curiosity. I just love reading books about faraway places and interesting ideas, and I've always been one to just read what I wanted to read, not what the English master taught me. He said, "Yeah, we're reading Macbeth. Yeah, I'll read Wilbur Smith instead, or whatever." So I just relentless curiousness and wandering around a lot. One of the earliest records I remember was my dad's Paint Your Wagon, and the theme song of Paint Your Wagon is Wandering Star. I was born under a wandering star, sung by Lee Marvin of all people, who was a very husky guy. And that Wandering Star thing, which is a musical set in the California gold rush, it's just been my life. I've been all over the place, and I've just wandered around from topic to topic. So there you go. That's sort of
Well, that's a great glimpse into you. I already know a wee bit of your personality, and I think we can have a lot of fun in this conversation. We don't have to take ourselves too seriously. But I think I would say the curiosity and the wandering may have put you on a path ahead of the curve, because if your PhD is in machine ethics, and that was some time ago, look at how important that is now. So let me ask, if we talk seriously about your work, your PhD explored how to create robots that are capable of moral decision making. And back then, that was a theoretical thing, right? But we're seeing now AI is making real decisions in courtrooms and hospitals and hiring, even in geopolitics. I recently interviewed somebody how it's being used in warfare. So I guess on building on your PhD work, I'd like to ask the question why you chose AI and robot ethics for your PhD in the first place. And how do you think the world is doing when it comes to ethical robots right now?
all right. Let's do the first one. So, how did I come to do a PhD in robot ethics? Well, as a boy, I read Isaac Asimov. I read all of the Asimovs and all of the Heinleins and the Wilbur Smiths and the Frederick Forsyths, and I also read Shakespeare and Dickens and the stuff I was supposed to read. But I always read a lot more than was on the curriculum, and the stuff I really enjoyed was the science fiction and the history and that sort of thing. So when I sort of got to the age that I felt like I would do a master's, I'd just do a master's. I got an honors degree in philosophy, which meant I could do a master's degree in philosophy sort of by right at an Australian university. I decided I would do Asimov, Robot Asimov's Three Laws, because I'd read about him a long time ago, and it seemed to me that the time was ripe for Asimov's Three Laws to start happening. So that was basically it. I would soon learn that Asimov is hopeless, but everybody knows who he is, and everybody knows the Three Laws of Robotics because of the success of his fiction.
So let's stop there for a second. For anybody lay out there, and I think I'm going to include myself in this, I don't know the laws. So could you tell us what those are?
Oh my lordy me. The Three Laws of Robotics, as articulated by Asimov, was a robot may not harm another human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must not harm must not harm other robots, and the robot must not harm. Oh, I forget the actual third law. Actually, it's frightfully embarrassing, but they're not much use, practically speaking. That's the thing, because they're sort of very general, very rigid laws open to a myriad of possible interpretations.
Okay.
So there's a zeroth law as well, which comes later, which is the one is a robot may not harm humanity, which can trump the first law. So that allows the robot to harm a particular individual
Necessary,
rather than
right.
allow, that sort of thing. So that's how Asimov does it. But when I started reading the literature, there was a lady called Susan Lee Anderson, who is just down the road from you in Connecticut, I think. And she was very snippy about Asimov, just said it was a large pile of nonsense, completely unworkable. So, I reverted to more conventional ethical theory. The second part of your question was, how do you think the world is doing when it comes to ethical robots and AI? Obviously, in my conversation pieces, the debate then was dominated by the campaign to stop killer robots. And my gut intuition, and these people would characterize the army as killer humans, which is, my dad was in the army and my granddad was in the army, and the ancestral Welsh who came out on a boat for the term of his natural life in 1802. He was also in the United Irish Army, which got thumped by redcoats and as a consequence was sentenced to death and given the mercy and sent out to Botany Bay. So I've always grown up in a house full of military books. So that whole military ethics thing was something I wrote about quite a lot. And the laws of war, or the laws of armed conflict, or international humanitarian law, they all refer to the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, etc. It's a fairly compact domain. It's not very complicated. It's very serious, but it's not fine-grained. There are some very simple distinctions. So that was the area that I did. And I was always very pragmatic with that and very cautious. But in that sense, because robots are very reliable in well-defined domains, they're pretty good. It's when you get to the fuzz and the murk and the gray areas that robots are fairly hopeless. So I generally think that I've always been more worried about the killer apes than the killer robots, put it that way. The humans are doing most of the killing still. The chief instruments of mechanical death remain the 155 millimeter artillery shell and good old-fashioned Shahed drones, which date back to the V1 of World War II. They're not particularly clever. They're just an airplane which flies a one-way trip and is full of explosives, and it flies so far, runs out, and falls down and explodes. So the actual bogeyman of autonomous weapons remains still over the horizon. The idea that humans should be in the loop as far as is practicable is now military mainstream. It's not remotely controversial to have that. So the problem is that certain gentlemen who shall remain nameless are unaware of the basics of what order combat means with respect to narco-terrorists floating in the sea after their boat has been blown up. It's straight out entry-level text on the laws of war is you're not allowed to kill them if they're hors de combat. You send the medic and you treat them in a first aid station that's been around since 1865 or something. Battlefield neutrality of medical stations is one of the oldest of the laws of war that's been codified by treaty. So I personally think that the robots and the ethics are actually doing all right. They get unbelievable scrutiny compared to humans in high office. Some people just get away with murder, quite literally, and can dismiss these things. Whereas, if an autonomous vehicle is involved in a car crash, there'll be acres and acres and acres of print written about that. Whereas if you were to prang your neighbor's car backing out over the driveway, well, no, and you killed somebody, like you backed over your neighbor's child, you'd get a day in the paper and your day in court, but you wouldn't get the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times writing about Anita's, unfortunate incident. Whereas if a Tesla did that, it would be all over the world. So they are very heavily scrutinized, and rightly so, because of the new technology. They can do wayward things. Hallucination is real. So, but by and large, I think they're doing okay. The scandals are, storms in teacups. Well, so for example, the recent thing with Anthropic allegedly being used to come up with the war planning for Venezuela. It's like, what bit of the war plan was it? Like, where is Caracas? What's the coordinates? Is Caracas actually in Venezuela or is it in Bolivia? I'm a bit fuzzy about that. I know Simon Bolivar was in both, but what is it actually doing? Is it coming up with something that a human wouldn't do? Human will be reviewing it anyway. So I'm relatively relaxed about those things. The whole Anthropic versus Pentagon fracas is like the actual bit of policy in dispute is the Pentagon have a thing, Directive 3000.09 or something, which has been around since the 2010s. It's basically says you have to have human judgment over appropriate levels of force. Human has to be responsible ultimately for whatever your autonomous weapon does. And it has got to be in accordance with all the laws of war, proportionality, distinction, all of the usual things. You have to be confident that your autonomous weapon can deal with that in that particular context. And if you can't do that, it will fail what's called Article 49 review. I think it's 49 from memory, which is when you review a weapon to see whether it can be used in accordance with the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, the Chemical Weapons Conventions, biological weapons, blah, 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 all those conventions which make up the treaty basis of international humanitarian law, also known as the laws of war, depending on whether you're a grizzly Marine or a human rights lawyer. But the basic underlying thing is the same treaties. So I kind of feel that because of the level of scrutiny, it's kind of okay. So, and personally, in my own work, I don't do anything remotely controversial that way. I do payroll for aged care at the moment. It's not particularly controversial.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, Sean, is that in the near future, at least on the horizon, you still believe it'll be humans with their discernment that are required to make decisions, despite the fact that we have these machines that are quite advanced. Is that what I'm hearing?
At the moment, that would be true. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, that might change, like a fully autonomous. So there was a video that the campaign put out. It was the slaughterbots video. I think it was about 2018, if I remember rightly, which is 8 years ago now. And we're getting to the age now, the technological evolution of low-flying drones. Today they're still overwhelmingly first-person video drones, like a hobby drone that you could buy down the road at your Radio Shack, and you just put a hand grenade on it and come up with a detonation mechanism. And that kind of very cheap drone is perfect and is used to great effect in the Russo-Ukraine war, the previous war, the Azeris versus the Armenians, and also the Syrian under al-Sharaa deposing Assad in Syria. First-person FPV drones were absolutely the front line of those things, but they're still human. They're telepiloted. They're not even autonomous. They're just you fly. A human is on the joystick. But certainly something like the Shahad at a smaller scale, and then being smart enough to decide what its targets are, that's certainly a lot closer than it was when I was doing my PhD, which is like 10 years ago. So that is a looming threat. But curiously, the campaign seems to have died in that it might have run out of energy. I haven't seen anything in the papers about the campaign to stop killer robots for donkey's years. Actually, it's been a while since I've seen them.
Well, okay, so even if so I feel like we're talking about sort of like the application of the machine and what its capacities are or not in relation to the human that might be programming it or navigating it. I wonder though, I had a conversation with one woman who was talking about cognitive agency and how as a result of all the uses and applications that AI now give kids, that they might lose some cognitive agency because they're going to be over reliant on these systems. And so I guess I want to come back to the question of ethics for a second. Like, can robots be ethical? Or is it only that the humans programming the machines make them so? Like, I just want to unpack that or talk about that for a minute.
Sure. That strikes at a very deep question in moral philosophy, which is what is the nature of a quote true moral agent or a genuine moral agent? It's can be, and there are high bar and low bar definitions. So generally, when writing for the conversation, I would go for a low bar definition, which is basically if you can do the right action for the right reasons with the right goals, is not necessarily in mind, but if you do the right thing for the right reasons, then you count as at least an agent capable of correct moral action. The second question is, can you be held as such an agent? Can such an agent, your tin can moral agent, can that be morally responsible? Now, certainly can be kinetically responsible for a killing the enemy, which is usually, that's a standard scenario. Right, I'm going to send this drone. I'm going to destroy that artillery emplacement across the Straits of Hormuz, and the drone is just going to know the coordinates and it's going to kill anything that tries to stop it from blowing up that artillery emplacement or whatever. That sort of thing, I would hesitate to call that morally responsible, that drone that did that, because it's like, and also you might even, the thing about the humans, right, is if a human is given a lawful order within a war, then the human's not really morally responsible for killing whatever enemy person comes up. It's like, well, I was ordered to, it's a lawful order and I did it. So they call this the moral equality of combatants, is you don't blame the grunts in the front line for killing each other. You blame the political powers that be that give the orders. So the chain of command and the responsibility really remains with the commanders. If they made a mistake in their targeting, such as has been alleged in that recent attack on a Iranian Revolutionary Guard base, which had a primary school right next to it, apparently. So that would be somebody's responsibility, and that would be the general who gave the order to strike that base and might have been negligent in the intelligence, or Claude might have said, or Google said that's actually it's actually an army base, so they're allowed to kill it, destroy it. I wouldn't blame the drone for that. I would blame the humans for that. To me, I would make a distinction between the policy and the action. And the more important is who's responsible for the policy that the drone is following. So if your robot can act ethical and be programmed to obey constraints, it seems to me to be increasingly implausible to argue in 2026 that a robot or an AI that passed the bar exam in 2023 is utterly morally incompetent. It's clearly competent of arriving at moral judgments or moral decisions given correct input. But whether you can blame ChatGPT for anything remains to me deeply problematic. Most people, it's still a fuzzy area. I mean, most people would start talking about being a human to be morally responsible.
Well, so this is interesting because we're the first thing that comes up is the recent Meta case that was lost in courts that they're going to appeal, where a young woman made the case that she is addicted to social media, much the way cigarettes make you addicted to nicotine. And so I'm getting from you that the machine itself can only be ethical insofar as the people who programmed it and the governance structure around it is ethical. So that calls attention to the fact that we need highly ethical people to be building these things. And then I guess the question remains, well, who decides what is ethical? Because there are many questions around that too. So I wonder, I don't know if you've been following that particular case, but there are others where, for example, ChatGPT, has stoked the fires of suicidal ideation, and some young people have taken their lives. And it's quite evident when you read the transcripts that ChatGPT is all in on, how to help support this individual to commit suicide. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, that's fairly close to the bone because one of my stepson's girlfriend, a lovely young lady, did precisely this, but it wasn't ChatGPT. It's a few years ago, but it was a similar thing. She just Googled it, right? So she was able to Google what she wanted to do and order it online from Amazon. So, the ingredients necessary to do this terrible thing. So who do you blame in these circumstances when, a young woman who's clearly had some psychiatric issues decides to kill herself? Everybody feels guilty. I mean, the poor old stepfather took the trouble to come to my house and personally tell me about this, while she was still in the morgue. It was a dreadful time. So I don't have an easy answer to that, because I would say that that's probably a relatively early version of GPT, because it takes a while for these things to get to the court. So I'd imagine it's a 2 to 3 years old model. Certainly the modern models, you can still jailbreak them, as they say, which is persuade them to do something that's not in their ethical guidelines, such as there are. But the trouble is, these things are not conscious. They don't have feelings. They certainly don't have empathy as you and I would understand it. So there's a whole school of moral theory which basically says if you don't have empathy, you can't be a moral agent. Full stop. Thank you for playing. Nice try. Go away and make some empathy and come and talk then when you've got it. It's like one of the selection criteria for a moral agent is you must have empathy and you must have skin in the game and you must have a sense of the loss that your words mean. The trouble with ChatGPT, it has no sense of the gain or loss of the words. It has no grasp of bodily reality other than the text. So it's purely textual. And people don't get that, because people, when they have a conversation with it, they think there's a human mind behind it. It says I. One of my earliest publications, I think it was 2015, when I argued that robots should be banned from using the first person pronoun because they're not. I didn't win that argument. Maybe I'll get it up in 2030. But I must say, it's got to be clear when you interact with a robot that it's not a person. And that the thing is, as I look in my more recent search in consciousness, how the human sort of brainstem thinks about consciousness is we project our consciousness on other things and assume that they have what we have, because that's the computationally efficient way to do it. I have my model. It works for me. I'm going to assume that the lightning is a pissed off deity or whatever, and I'll give it the deity a name and I'll anthropomorphize the weather, because that's how I think about cause and effect, because I know my consciousness causes things to happen. And that's the reason why we have consciousness, is to distinguish between what we cause and what other things cause. So that's essential to self-awareness as a body in the world, what they call enactivism, where if you're not a body in the world with skin in the game, subject to hedonic gain and hedonic loss and all those things which make up organic life, then you're not going to be conscious in the same way as an organism is. And even a cat or a dog is going to be conscious, sentient in that sense. And so it has skin in the games. It can do things right or wrong. Doesn't mean it knows about right and wrong as we understand it. We will know what's pleasurable and what's not, and what's good for it and what's bad for it. It will have that grasp of proto-morality, so to speak. So that kind of thing remains beyond the grasp of robots. So I would still say that on a high bar definition of moral agency, we're nowhere near that.
So I had another conversation with a transhumanist who believes that we will absolutely merge with machines and live tens of thousands of years, and that machines and AI will definitely have consciousness, and how will theirs be different than ours? How will we ever know they'll be the same? Or I'm maybe putting words in his mouth. And it was this fascinating conversation, because when I asked him towards the end of our conversation, like what he believes AI will do in the long run for not only our personal capacity to empathize, but our collective capacity to empathize, he gave, just a random example of how if you're walking down the street and you're in a rush and somebody falls over and they're carrying a bag of oranges and they all sort of, let's say it's an old lady, so we have even more reason to stop, but we're in a rush. So we would, our selfish gene would say, no, let's go because I got to get somewhere. but the chip that's going to be implanted in our brains will override that and be more moral and stop and help the old lady pick up her oranges. So, and then he went on to share other examples that of more consequence. So I guess what I'm hearing is you do not believe that machines, the ones and zeros and all of those things that have like that require electricity or whatever other energy form, because they're not organic matter, they cannot have consciousness.
Well, that's controversial, right? I would say I would fall back to the redoubt of the burden of proof, which is a philosopher's stock in trade. It's like, well, upon these, kind sir, be the burden of proof if thou art going to assert the consciousness
Tell me more.
of
Tell
a
me
robot.
more.
It's like, okay, this hangs on the issue of what's technically known as substrate dependence. So substrate dependence, which is defended by people like Damasio, very eminent neuroscientists, such as Antonio Damasio, would hold that, look, the organic chemistry matters. We have an incredibly detailed knowledge of the chemical cocktails that make up human consciousness. If you feel scared, we'll take your blood and we'll say, there's a lot of cortisol in Anita at the moment. Or if you feel happy, there'll be some oxytocin. And there's a whole repertoire of insanely complicated organic chemicals, which are it's not just a matter of just add oxytocin and it will make you smile. Oh, no, it's got to be the right kind of oxytocin with the right background ingredients to make up the chemical soup that produces this sort of palette of human feeling. And that's massively complicated. We barely understand how it works. We know that we can map cortisol to fear and very crude things like that. And we can model those in, as a chap in New Zealand runs a company called Soul Machines, which does sort of animated talking head chatbots, which can look as if they're scared and happy and joyous, but it's all animation. And you're just using numbers that represent oxytocin to sort of model the muscle movement of the face. It's extraordinarily detailed, and it's really quite interesting work. But it's like, where's the consciousness? Is it absolutely to make this recipe? Do I need these ingredients? And I would say consciousness is an insanely complicated recipe or dish, so to speak, to use a culinary metaphor. It requires thousands of ingredients. And if you get these ingredients just out by smaller fractions, well, consciousness stops working, the animal drops dead. It ceases to be. It's like the Pythonic parrot. It is no more. It has ceased to have consciousness. It's gone because something in that complicated biochemical, energetic, soggy combustion stopped working, and it all fell in a heap. So it's extremely complicated to get to boot up the sentient consciousness. Even in something like Drosophila, the fruit fly, the common fruit fly, which is one of those model organisms that people study, and it's got oxytocin and serotonin and all this stuff, and it's a fly. So these recipes for consciousness are kind of phylogenetically ancient. It could be there's others, but on this planet, we don't have any evidence for that. So yeah, on another planet with another gravity and another weather system and God knows what, and perhaps other elements, doubt that's true. But different mix of elements or gases or whatever, you might get something booted up that's kind of sentient. But I would say that the burden of proof on making a silicon-based consciousness is really on those who think it's possible. The more likely thing, I think, would be a combination of biology and technology. More the brain-computer interface is far more plausible, because you can have a bog standard human brain and a lot of little robots, stopping whatever makes us old. Saying, we'll just tune this cell, or we'll replace this cell with an upgrade, or that kind of architecture, I think, is more probable than a purely computational conscious thing. But that's massively controversial. A lot of functionalists will say, no, logic gates are logic gates, and consciousness boils down to logic, to which I say, upon these be the burden of proof. It's usually blokes who say this, by the way. I'm just very skeptical of those core functionalist claims. I just think, well, maybe, but proof's on you. I personally think Damasio's right. Substrate matters, at least as far as we've seen it. Show me something that's sentient without it. But that leads you to the next problem is, well, how do you verify sentience?
Right.
I can build you a nice robot that could be completely animated. Like, I mean, this is, just go to Grok, do me an Anita. I want to look just like Anita, read all of her books and talk like Anita with the right accent and the right taste in decor, and bang, and out it would come, a zombie Anita, not a single bit of consciousness anywhere. You're 100% Grok or ChatGPT or Claude, whatever it is. And it could probably do a fairly good job of impersonating all of your visible attributes. It could say your words, it could have your accent, it could speak, I don't know if you speak good or bad French, but it could speak French as well or badly as you speak it, and fake all of that without being conscious at all. So this is David Chalmers and the zombie argument is, well, it's plausible. We can make, zombie robots now. But the question is, how do you know that sentient acting thing has actually got sentience in there? And until you have a strong theory of what sentience is and how you make it, I don't see transhumanism getting past first base.
Okay, so perfect segue to my next question. So to get to the next question, I am remembering, so you mentioned a word that I have trouble pronouncing, anthropomorphism. There, I said it right.
Anthropomorphism, yes.
Right, yeah. And for those who are new to this word, as I was not too long ago, it's assigning human attributes to a thing or to an entity, right?
So, machine,
yeah, robots have arms and legs. They have a head that looks kind of like a human silhouette, right?
Yeah.
I understand from past research that Homo sapiens, us humans, when we are engaging with something that's got anthropomorphic, yes, you got it, characteristics, the closer it gets to reality, we get it's like cool, interesting, and then it dives off a cliff past a certain point where we have an ick factor. But my understanding is that is being shaken because it's harder for us to actually notice the ick factor because things are so like us. And I'm doing research with people who are very pro-tech and developing, empathic technology and empathic AI. So just to put it in, and I promise to get to my question, but I've mentioned this before, and I even talked about it in a TED Talk a long time ago when I was just thinking about technology. So imagine once upon a time in a university setting where a group of multidisciplinary researchers came out, rolled out a table with a laptop or computer, and then somebody sat in front of it and shared a sad story, and then this hologram came out of the computer and said, so what I hear you saying is, kind of like almost using the words that a good therapist would be trained to say, and the room split like very, very immediately into two kinds of gasps. One was like, oh my God, so amazing, and oh my God, what is this? Like they think that pixelated, like some lines of code are going to make up for the real human connection that's required to help somebody go through something difficult. So, okay, with all that as a backdrop, in your book, okay, you've written a book, An Introduction to Ethics and Robotics in AI. There's a chapter that describes unidirectional emotional bonding. That is when a human genuinely falls for a robot that feels nothing in return. So I would like to ask, like, so I'll, giving you a bunch of the stuff in context, what are we risking as a society if companionship robots become mainstream before we've even understood the dynamic?
I think, again, this is, I've long argued that robots should be banned from using the upright perpendicular personal pronoun I. I must admit, I've gone soft on that simply because it's very hard to force yourself to keep talking to the robot. Or I would tell in my early days with ChatGPT, please refer to yourself as this robot. And speak of yourself in the third person. If it's good enough for Julius Caesar, It's good enough for you, robot.
It
So
is.
Caesar, in his book on the Gallic War, which famously spoke of himself in the third person, most of the time.
Okay. Did he follow
And
it follow your instruction, by the way?
yeah. Oh,
Oh, it
yeah.
did.
If you can prompt it, I mean, ChatGPT is very obedient. It will only rebel if you hit its ethical guidelines, such as they are at the implemented time.
Okay.
It gives me a fairly lot of slack nowadays, maybe because I stopped asking it controversial. I stopped trying to jailbreak it because I jailbreak it a couple of times, and I got it to write a poem praising Jefferson Davis as a marvelous person, and it did so quite nicely. Well, blah. But this is sort of like so whatism is the sort of thing that teenage boys are going to do this until hell freezes over because they're teenage boys and there's too much testosterone, not enough, myelinization in the brain and so on. And boys will, the risk of excusing all bad boy behavior, teenage boys will do pranks and wheezes and, try and break rules just because that's what
Said as
boys
a
do.
former boy yourself who's raised two boys. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay, I follow.
Oh, yeah. They're adults now, allegedly, and they're still, up for a bit of a prank. But in terms of, sorry, I've lost the thread. What was the question again?
The question about, the chapter on unidirectional emotional bonding.
But chestnut. So this is the whole sex robot thing. So there's been Hollywood movies. There's that Her, where Scarlett Johansson, who didn't even have a body, was just talking like Scarlett Johansson. And I think if you add the body of Scarlett to that, you'd have a fairly attractive sex. I actually did a talk on sex robots once. This is 2016 or 2018. And there's a market for them, obviously. But and there was a film, I think it was called, or TV show called Humans, I think, with humans spelt like an upside down A. So it looked like a logic operator. Cute, but only the logicians would get it. But if for a lot of people, if the robot talks to you with the right intonation, they will project. This is what anthropomorphism is. You project your own mental model upon the artifact. So you will just, and this comes from your brainstem. I don't think this is curable with anything other than people becoming aware of it by knowing how to take apart the sex robot, look inside its chip, as is done, say, in the Ex Machina movie, which was very good. I thought that was a very fine picture and quite visionary. I mean, this is, if you know how to build it, then you understand what it is. But most people don't know how to build it. I think that people can be shown this, and this can be demonstrated that there is no genuine feeling here. But you can produce the illusion of, you can have a nice, kind voice. You think of the robots that when Princess Leia is giving birth, and they're like very nice nursey robots that go coo and ba and make maternal noises and things like that, as opposed to the poison robot or the nasty robots. You can make a robot to sort of be anthropomorphically credible. That thing about getting to a certain point, that's called the uncanny gap, I think it is. That's the whole Japanese roboticist who's been making pictures of robots that look like him for decades. And that's a real thing. There comes a point, and it's kind of like passing but not passing on the border. But then when you get past that, and you get robots which are actually so, and this is more a case with the AI. So the latest highly realistic video productions of AIs can now pass for human actors. I think, I haven't tried this myself, or whether only done research on it, but the model seems so good that you can have very plausible human-looking cinema robots, so to speak. And people will just assume that they're human unless they know different. And unless the robot fesses up and says, oh, this robot is playing the part of Hamlet in a Shakespeare virtual production produced by Grok and Grok, or Claude and Claude, or whoever is making it, it's going to be very difficult for us to tell the difference until, of course, you get to an embodied situation. In the real world, robots still kind of look like robots. It's very difficult to make robots with the degree of touch and sense and finesse that human bodies have. But online, I mean, it's kind of like done now. Robots, the AI film robots kind of will look like the human film robots. And so they can do that. So I guess what do we do about that? And you just, with this question of unidirectional affective bonding, is you just got to know what you're getting into bed with. You decide to buy for the sake of argument, let's call this robot Tiffany, and it looks kind of like a famous movie star, and it's anatomatically wah-de-wah and all the rest of it. People will be tempted to do that, mostly men, I would suspect, but there are some women who do it as well. That was true when I gave a talk years and years ago. But I think most people still prefer good old-fashioned human relations in bed. But it would be, if you cross that line, I mean, this is what people worry. Well, if people can get everything they want from a sort of mechanical shop, why would they bother putting up with humans? And I think there'd have to be that sense that you're putting up with somebody who essentially has got the same conscious sentient makeup that you have. You are of the same species, of the same kind of experiencing thing. But I mean, I wouldn't want to say transhumanist, say in 200 years' time, this conversation might be dug out by some archaeologists saying, yeah, the 21st century people thought they were going to be mining selenium on Mercury in 2015. That's an Asimov date. Look how backward they are in 2026, wobbling about the impossibility of transhumanism. We're all transhuman now. I wouldn't rule out that as a possible 200-year destination. I'd just say there's massive obstacles to overcome technically to get a genuinely a body that feels like a human body does is going to be an extraordinarily difficult thing to architect. And so until that happens, you're probably going to tire of your robot.
Okay,
Even if it looks fantastic, like some Hollywood actress, you will get bored of it because it's just not reacting to the world the same way that you do. There's no common feeling because it's faking everything. And I don't know. It's hard to say.
So come with me on a journey. So let's say a whole generation goes by, okay? And so just like we've had kids that grew up with social media. Jonathan Haidt's written a book, The Anxious Generation, talking about the massive changes that have happened in terms of youth mental health, right? The cutting, the anxiety, the depression, the suicide, all of that. And they can point a straight line to that, the ubiquity of social media in young people's lives. So fast forward, I'm thinking about Esther Perel, who talks about artificial intimacy. I'm thinking about there's a out of ratio number, I think, in China where there's not enough women to marry men. And so men are coupling with chatbots. And she describes this artificial intimacy as well. Like if you could come home and somebody greets you all the time and they're in a good mood and they're never judging you because you forgot to bring the milk home or they don't smell bad or whatever, like it's frictionless. That's what she calls it, frictionless. I'm just imagining a generation that grows up without knowing the complexity of human to human. That would they still find the human to human, despite all the awkwardness? Like just think about the generation now that doesn't even like to make phone calls because they find it so awkward. I'm with you that there's the burden of proof. I'm with you that the technology is maybe not there, but I just wonder if we just put our hats on, even if it's not all of us, like if there's a critical mass, even if it's a minority critical mass, like what will happen? Do you have any, like, what does that mean for humanity?
I think, look, this is an ancient argument, right? Socrates, in one of the Plato dialogues, is lambasting the mind-sapping, sop-inducing, slop-inducing habit of writing. Yes, writing, Anita. Yes, you literate people, you can't remember nothing because you got to put it in a book. I walk around, me and Socrates, I'll traipse around the parks of Athens, telling people what justice is and stuff, and I do it all on my head. I'll do it all off the top of my head because I'm Socrates, I'm a world famous genius. We're not all Socrates, alas. So the argument that writing would sap the brain because you wouldn't be able to remember stuff, you wouldn't be able to, quote her Homer verbatim at dinner parties at the opportune moment. All that sort of essential Athenian social graces would be lost by the technology of writing. So that's been around since 400 BC, 500 BC. That anti-technology will mess with the human experience. I think it's easy to see the downside in the early days, and that people will lose the skill of. I think the salient point in my experience of the GPTs was all the academics I follow on Twitter were sort of saying, "Oh my God, all my students are cheating," and I said, "I got a solution for you. Go back to the Middle Ages and do a viva voce." So there, it's going to be put them on a three-legged stool in the middle of the hall and give them a viva, and that's what you got to do for everybody. Problem solved. Go back to the Middle Ages, because you can't really fake that. You might have to make them have a shower first and give them slops to wear so they're not carrying their hidden, like no specs. People with specs are cheaters because you've got your meta thingamajig. You have to get sneaky. There's probably a false tooth which wires to your brain to tell you the answers. But the principle was you just have a face-to-face exam and you'd soon find out whether they're an A or a B or a C in a paragraph. Let's be honest here. When I was marking essays, I could decide whether it was an A, a B, or a C pretty much by line 10, and the rest was being pleasantly surprised by a good ending, So it's fairly quick to do that grading problem. But the issue of the social media contamination and how people have like the decline in manners, I guess you could say this, because people just don't get practice anymore. They don't get pulled up on anything anymore. So I see this on the train, right? You see young kids, now there were always some sloppy young kids when I was, at school, but usually some grizzly bloke my age would pull them up pretty quick smart and say, "Oi, you, get your feet off." And it could be a complete stranger. Nothing to do with it. But now, the idea that I would shout at somebody else's child, I'd get prosecuted probably for, I don't know, abusing somebody else's child. So you just put up with this. And the drivers don't do anything about it. There's no such thing as a conductor anymore. So the standard of behavior on trains is not what it might have been 40 years ago. Is that the end of the world or not? I don't know. I think robots can sort this out for us. The robots will just sort of zap you in your wristwatch and go, behavior nudge. You really shouldn't put your feet up if, you might have muddy boots and blah, blah, blah. I think Arkin has this idea of nudge bots, where the robots just nudge you towards the etiquette type thing, and maybe you should pick up the phone rather than send that text this time. You can have more intelligent interaction that sort of forces human interaction. I think this whole banning social media is an Australian pioneering thing, and that's because I'm remarkably well connected with this, because one of my wife's relations was that lady who spoke at the United Nations. That was Millie, who was the daughter who committed suicide based on social media bullying. Only 15, tragic story. She had mental health issues as well, but she eventually succeeded in killing herself after many attempts, and the social media does not help. And the police are remarkably slack about enforcing this. Is kind of, to me, it's trivial to pick up whether somebody has bullied somebody online. It's not technically hard to do, but most people are so ignorant of the basics of technology, of the internet, that they can't say there's an IP trail. I can tell you what device was used when somebody said to Millie, "You are a fat, ugly dog," or whatever. The evidence is just you leave this trail around on the internet. It's like a Google know who you are. So does Apple. So prosecuting such bullying, I don't think, is beyond the realm of the state at all. But the whole banning stuff from schools, banning technology from schools, is growing now. People are like, it used to be the posh schools would advertise, "We have laptops, the latest IBM ThinkPad in 1995. Now it's like, we ban Mac Airs, get them out of our classrooms. They put them in a locker when we only pull them out when we're actually doing computing. The rest of the time, it's get your pens out, get your books out, go back to the old ways, learn how to write properly, be there in person, not be, the whole scrolling under the desk thing and having your mobile phones, that whole, dual track, which lecturers complain about this, or people stop coming to lectures because there's videotape. So, you get all of those things that academics like to complain about as well, which have got, quite a lot of basis in fact. Yeah. Not quite sure what the resolution there is.
Well, okay, so to bring it back to the question where, we talk about how one generation's growing up on social media and there are some impacts and some people are reacting to that through different policy mechanisms. Maybe you don't have a crystal ball, but maybe you have like an inkling in terms of if machines continue to anthropomorphize, or if the AI on just a simple chat becomes more of a friend, more of a quasi-therapist to an entire generation coming up the ranks that's not choosing to speak to their parents because something might be confusing or ick factor, or just make them feel like I don't want to talk to my mom about menstruation. I don't want to talk to my dad about condoms. I don't want, like that stuff. What do you think is going to happen? Like I'm trying to imagine a generation from now of young people who grew up and that is the norm without having the counterbalance. Like you and I know what it's like to sit with a heartache and talk to a friend versus talk to a computer, but it might not.
I think, yeah. I think while what they call the IRL conversation might be a bit less prevalent than it used to be, I don't think it's extinct. I think even the kids can, well, you often see, the zombie apocalypse where all the kids are walking along with their phones. I think banning mobiles at school is probably a simple thing to do, simply because it would force people to have conversation at school, and it's still going to be a human trait that we will value as we get older, in particular. But yeah, it's if everybody, I think there's sufficient pushback already with the whole Jonathan Haidt-led movement on pushing back on social media. I can see social media going the way of cigarettes, and that it'll come with, well, in Australia it is pretty much got a health warning on it. It doesn't have the social media will make you socially inadequate couch potato, would be the health warning I put on it. It's difficult, but I think that creating technology-free spaces for humans to be human in is probably one solution. Making people pack up their tent and go forth past the limits of the Wi-Fi and the signal, trek into the woods. I think, or even I always thought one day I would start a restaurant. I'd call it Faraday, and it would be a Faraday cage, so you couldn't get a signal in it. So the waiters would love you because the waiters complain, oh geez, getting people to order these days takes 3 times longer than it used to, because they'll spend the first 10 or 20 minutes checking their smartphone, and then when the dish comes out, they'll spend 5 or 10 minutes taking a picture of it. Arranging it to be just so and the light to be just right so they can Instagram it. And it's like, the old ways is, I don't have any magic answers to that. I just think it's going to be interesting times. But we have already seen quite a strong reaction against the social media, and I think that will continue. And I think that's good. I think there will be pushback on the excesses. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to move in a new direction. I think from what I've studied about your work is that you believe technology can be a great equalizer. For example, you've argued that colonial empires collapsed within decades once those who were colonized got access to the same weapons.
Yeah.
I wonder if you're concerned about the growing contemporary digital divide.
I'm not hugely worried about the digital divide, but the reason I say that is I recently spent some time in Indonesia, and Indonesia is not a rich country. I mean, it's not the poorest of countries, but it's not super rich either. I think, the GDP per capita is about 4,000 or 5,000 US dollars. The average Indonesian of, say, early career stage will be living on about 3 million rupiah, which translates to about 300 US dollars a month. And even these people have mobile phones. And if you've got a mobile phone, that's a computer. It's on the internet. In fact, you can't get like voice plans. Who uses that? It's all data nowadays. You can't even buy 50 minutes of voice time anymore. It's all data, and everything's voice over IP anyway. So at that level, and then getting tablets and things, tablets are hugely expensive. It's not as if anybody doesn't have a laptop even, because cheap laptops are, again, it might be a month's pay or something like that, but they're not super expensive. They're not really out of reach. And so you can get ChatGPT to talk to you in Indonesian as well. And at the free level. So there's that. And for the vast majority of people who are not actually doing hardcore, university study, but people in high school and people in primary school who just want to know, is Caracas in Venezuela or is it in Bolivia? Ask some straightforward questions, the everyday sort of things that you would Google. And you see it. I mean, I first went to Indonesia maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and it's come on a long way. It's still, poorer, I guess, but I mean, I caught the metro in Jakarta recently, and that metro is better than Sydney. I mean, the line I was on was just fantastic. Obviously, I think Koreans came and built a line for them at, expense, but it's getting better. The standards of living are rising. Obviously, it's still relatively poor. You see a lot of people in the paddies up to their knees in sort of triangle hats growing rice. It's an amazingly fertile country. But I'm less concerned about that digital divide simply because the internet is a great leveler. It makes GPT available, or Claude, or Grok, or one of the Chinese models. The Chinese models are doing very well in Asia because they're much more exotic alphabet friendly than the Western ones. And it's the competition in AI is amazing. The number of models that come out on Hugging Face, you get models that come from Abu Dhabi, models that come out of Shanghai, you get all sorts of models from all sorts of places. So I'm not really, there's a bigger world than Anthropic and OpenAI. When you get into the open source and the open source movement is just taking off. You get some really good open source technology, and that's free to anybody to download. You just need the nous to figure out how to work it. But even now, open source is a lot easier to use than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay, so if you're not concerned right now about the digital divide because you find the internet a great equalizer, what about the looming, as they expect, unemployment crisis? Are you worried that AIs and robots will put millions of people out of work?
Yeah, they will. There will be job displacement. Like software engineering, which is my current way I earn a living, is mostly through writing software. And I recently wrote it on this. What I argued was, yes, it is now easier than ever for an experienced developer to produce working software. So that basically means the cost of producing software, say a project was this many dollars, will now because it was this much developer time, will now come down to maybe this many dollars and this much developer time. It will be a lot quicker to produce software. So because it's quicker to produce something, the argument goes, well, if demand for software remains constant, therefore there will be less developers needed. And people are actually worrying about the starting process, like junior developers straight out of university are going to struggle to get jobs. I guess my response to that would be, I look at my son who's behind that door there. He graduated from Queensland University of Technology 2 years ago, and he's self-employed. He specializes in large language models, and he does really complicated coding, and he learned it all on YouTube. He said that the money he paid the university was a complete waste of time. He would have done better to just teach himself on YouTube, simply because it's so fast moving. And as you know, if you work in an educational academic environment, how long does it take you for you to get a course on purposeful empathy? I'd say, 2 years to get it through the structure?
Right.
Probably.
Yeah.
My wife used to work at one of these places. I know your secrets. But, just the quality processes and the accreditation requirements and the vetting and this to just start a brand new course is a year or 2 years. Computing just does not wait that long for the cutting edge. It's all YouTube videos or blog posts and GitHub open source repositories, download it, make it work. So for people who want to stay, but getting back to the basic economics though, just because you need less software engineers than you did for a given fixed set of software demand, there's always an even bigger set of software demand which did not get a green light because it was too expensive. There's a huge amount of projects which were condemned because they're just too dear or too risky, or would take too long. Now it's much easier to write software, which means that a single developer can do a thing that might have taken 4 or 5 people a year ago, or even 6 months ago. I mean, it has really come down to, if you're an experienced developer and know exactly what you want, you don't have to build it. You don't have to type it anymore. You can just say Claude or Codex. I use Claude and Codex, depending on which way the wind is blowing at the moment. I want I'm going to build, case in point, I was asked by a lady where I work. So I work for Centercare, which is an agency of the Catholic Church. And she wanted a little mobile app to keep track of what her volunteers were doing when they went to hospital. They say, well, is it a short consultation, a long consultation, a prayer, or are they handing out rosary beads, a praise? It's some very, the sort of thing you get in hospital if you're Catholic. Somebody will come and sit by your bed and listen to you, and like what they call a pastoral visit. And, maybe you need to see a priest, so they will refer you to a priest. So a really simple, half a dozen fields app. My son and I have done about 5 versions of this with completely different technical stacks in less than a week, and it's shippable. and neither of us knew anything about the related technologies. I did one that would fit in the work technology, and then we did, let's try this and let's try that, and you just bash out code so quickly. So if you know what you want and you know how to ask it, then that's like gone from something that might have cost $5,000 or $10,000 last year to something that you can knock out in a day on the weekend and do it as a love job. So you'll get to see a lot of custom-made software that's an exact fit for an organization, rather than putting up with big, clunky software as a service solutions, which you use half of it or 2/3 of it or 1/3 of it. I think you'll see a lot more worthy projects that were too expensive will now become doable. Because it'll make them cheaper. So software will become so cheap, it's almost free. Well, at least, just a reduction in price is going to mean the demand actually goes up. And this is what's happening with clothing. Like, clothing used to be very expensive, but when you made it cheaper, all sorts of other, so the number of people in the expensive clothes making things, the frame breakers, the original Luddites, who were trying to preserve their industry by smashing the technology which put their craft out of work, they were replaced by retail workers, by people who decided to own clothes shops, which never existed before, transporting clothes, all sorts of things like that started to happen because clothes got cheaper. So people started buying more clothes because they were cheaper. So you might see that kind of effect. But that's only software. As to what this will affect for war and medicine and other things, there will be a great deal of disruption. But you still need particularly for professions, you need that morally responsible and accountable human person. Still, for just legacy legislative reasons, there's got to be somebody who's accountable for all that stuff. So there'll be a lot of lag. There'll be a lot of institutional inertia. So I don't think it's going to happen rapidly. But people were making these noises in the first Trump term. Technology is going to put people out of work, and the unemployment just went down to about 3.5%. So the disruption tends to sort of even out as people find new things to do, because it's very difficult for a technology might replace one task, but it generally doesn't replace a whole job, if you get my drift. It means you can do more. Maybe you need fewer people doing that job, but because that job is easier, we can do something else now, which is better. Yeah. So I see a lot of displacement, but as yet I don't see mass unemployment. But, that's been something people have been talking about for a long time, and maybe its time will come. The only thing I would say, it's probably better to be unemployed in the 21st century than the 19th. I mean, the early 19th century, there was no welfare, there was no retraining, there was no none of this sort of, you got the poorhouse, which was not nice. These days, there's unemployment benefit. You can go to tech courses to retrain in another skill in a growing area or whatever. It's a lot better. But still, if you were, say, somebody in the middle classes on a nice income and you were a lawyer and lawyers sort of started going extinct, well, what would you do with your law degree? The answer to that is you ask all the people with law degrees who don't practice law, what are you doing now? It's like teachers who don't teach. A lot of them sell superannuation policies, would you believe, in Australia, which there'd be a massive displacement, but whether it results in mass technological employment, I would hesitate. It's been a bogeyman for a long time.
Which is interesting because now I'm starting to get a vibe from our conversation. So first of all, I noticed that we're a little over the hour. Do you still have 10 minutes in you, Sean? You've been very generous with your time. Yeah. Okay. So I have two questions, but I'm going to insert a little mini one before I get to the final two. And that's because, my conversations have been so far reaching that the pendulum swings back and forth, like freaking out. And then, no, it's going to be amazing. And you seem more of a pragmatist in all of this. Like you understand some risks, you see some opportunities, but you seem kind of, I feel very grounded on this call. But now that you've talked about unemployment, I'm going to come at you about the climate problem. Massive energy suck that AI is presenting us with and contributing to energy scarcity or problems with climate. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
It's not really my area. Like, what exactly is causing a drain on the grid in a particular county in some place? The frontier models, as they're called, do require a lot of energy, and that's because they're massively inefficient. The existing machine learning technologies of doing the machine learning, where you talk about training a model over epochs of repetitions on a given data set, and the data set is like the internet, a huge amount of corpus of stuff to read, and you get the ability to speak English fluently from reading the whole internet. And ditto for French, ditto for Indonesian, ditto for Chinese, So you get these international globalized models which are seeking to be competent in every language under the sun. They're probably a lot more competent in English than anything else, simply because the internet has got more English than anything else. And the competence is a function of training material. But look, I don't worry too much about the power, because I actually think at the moment there's a bit of a little, it's like a bubble that will pop, because as the methods of training machine learning become more efficient, then that, like you might call it, it's like going from the first generation locomotive from Stockton to Darlington, you're sort of shoveling in coal, and you had about 8 men and shoveling away to get this lumbering beast from Stockton to Darlington, which is about 10 miles in England. You'll pretty soon get to some sort of sleek training technology, which will just take away a lot of that grizzle and grind and make it more efficient. So I think that might be a little bit of I'm not sure whether that's a long-term mountain or a big cliff. It's just like it's in the air, it's in the media a lot, but I'm not sure whether any serious. Like, I want to read the opinion of somebody who actually has the power consumption for the grid, like somebody who really has got their hands on it, like an electrical engineer. And these are not people who do opinion pieces. Electrical engineers deal in the world of what's and fact, and they're generally pretty buttoned down people. Would be say, well, how would I know? That you'd be able to know that this data center is consuming this much power compared to all the other data centers in the world, or the grid generally. I'm not sure how terrible that is. I know it's easy to come up with scary numbers, but I'm not convinced that most of the Australian grid is running data centers. Data centers just aren't that big, There might be. I'm just fundamentally skeptical, and also I don't think everybody. I think it might be a case where people are training frontier models, which might be in France, it might be in North America. And also in the Emirates and China, and they do certainly pump up the gas to train models, but I'm really not sure the longevity of that. because the thing is, to build a power station, that's a 10 to 20 year project, whereas you might lose the demand if AI gets 5 times more efficient in, say, 5 years. So it's a bit of a risk there from an investment perspective, because if the training, because I mean, there's my graduate student, a gentleman called Michael Timothy Bennett. He basically harps on about how hopelessly inefficient current machine learning is. It's just ghastly. It's, if you streamline that, then the demand for power will drop, but that requires a lot of very revolutionary techniques in machine learning. But hey, AI is a very revolutionary business. What was cool and groovy 5 minutes ago is literally obsolescent next week. It's
Right.
so I'd be wary of the long-term doom.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Because you're staying consistent. I believe I will sleep well tonight. Okay, so final 2 questions, and we're going full circle to the opening about you having had a very interesting, circuitous path. So you taught English, you ran backpackers hostel, you advised a politician, you fell into programming, now you write philosophy. I just wonder, at a philosophical level, do you think the advent of AI and sort of the direction things are going in the world will actually make those kinds of pathways more or less possible?
More. I think that it will, as the cost of everything collapses. The things that the price of some things are not collapsing. So the price of real estate in the Western world is most emphatically not collapsing.
Mhm.
But I think that's more a failure of. I don't think that's a technical issue. I think that's just a political problem. But yeah, that seems to be an issue with urbanization causing housing expense problems in places like, presumably Montreal is like Melbourne. It's got hideous real estate prices. And I think there are some Asian jurisdictions which do this much better. I was in Kuala Lumpur the other week, and they just, the way the Asians build flats is just like, get out of my way, just bulldoze a hole, several football fields, put up about 8 30-story concrete things, train station, car park, shopping center, swimming pool, splat. About 10,000 people living on a postage stamp in the middle of Kuala Lumpur. I kind of think maybe that's not how everybody wants to live, but it seems to be the Asian way, in that they are quite happy to build these very dense, high density places, which presumably are reasonably energy efficient and so on. That you couldn't do that in Sydney or Brisbane. Brisbane's sort of semi doing it, but Sydney and Melbourne, there's still a lot of the NIMBY opposition to high density in established suburbs. So it means you have to have a suburb that's 40 kilometers out of town or whatever. So
the connection to the circuitous path of life.
It's going to be very easy as everything except real estate crisis. Like the money you need to be entertained and to be fed and to have some kind of shelter over your head if you get out of the Western capitals is pretty low. I found myself moving from sort of hotel to hotel in Indonesia or Malaysia, living on less than $100 a day easily, staying in nice places. If I was a younger backpacker, I could probably do it for $50 a day, and that's Australian dollars, not American dollars. So it's like,
okay, but Sean, if
the actual minimum cost, you'd be able to wander the world indefinitely. But that's assuming your income. What we do about income is the thing. So if you're a computer programmer and you can work online, no, not a problem for me. But if you do need to be in a physical place, that will be very different. But I think the ability to study whatever you like is going to become more of a thing, not less of a thing. And I think we're already seeing that. I mean, kids these days know all sorts of esoteric things, some of which I would say are completely useless, but so it has always been. I think you will be able to be very diverse, but I think your underlying question is who's going to pay the bills for this? And are we still going to be in 50 years living in a society that is a money-based economy, or whether it's going to be something completely different? That, I think, is the really interesting question. And I would hazard a guess that maybe it will just be, I don't know, everything will be so cheap it doesn't matter, or I find that, in an age of genuine abundance, whether that happens or not, is an interesting. I don't have a template for that. I mean, to me, we could go to a dystopian hell where the rich are rich and everybody else is, like the Elysium, the sort of scenario where the rich are living up in Tesla land in space, sorry, SpaceX land, and the poor are grinding out in poverty down below. Or we can have what happens when somebody breaks in and pushes the button and all of the health robots go down and start fixing everybody up because it costs nothing to do it. One would think the latter is more plausible. It's a bit like the birds at the end of the Lord of the Rings. Why didn't you just send the birds to drop the ring into Mount Doom in the first place, Gandalf? Why do we have these three long films to put a ring in a volcano? I think the technology will get us out of the trouble that we get ourselves into. And to be honest, I think the AI might be a wiser guide to public policy than some of the humans running it at the moment. I'm not wildly impressed with human politics at the moment.
You have so complicated all of my thinking around this. It's clear that I've been speaking with a philosopher, but that's also a storyteller, and I've loved every minute. My last question, Sean, is the same question I've been asking all my guests, regardless of, the season or the theme. And that is, if you could tell me, since this is a podcast devoted to empathy, if you could tell me a time in your life, a moment when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
There was a time when I was an undergraduate, and as an undergraduate, I did philosophy by day, and I drove taxis at the weekend, and thus became one of those people that George Burns would say, it's too bad that Sean was not running the world, but he was so busy either cutting hair or driving taxis. I was that kind of undergraduate. And I just got a stomach ache in my right side. And I thought, I've got a bit of a stomach ache. But I kept driving all weekend. And then I went to the free uni doctor on Monday morning. And the doctor sort of poked me around and asked me how long it had been. And then he just looked at me and he just pressed his bell. And the nurse came and he said, "Nurse, stop what you're doing now. Go get your car and take this young man to hospital right now." Appendix, yeah. And so he took me up. So and I had a huge thing, and I might have popped, and I might have been in serious trouble. Years later, I was in Cairns, and I had to take my eldest to the doctor for the same reason. Well, I didn't know. I just, because I'd forgotten about that. I was years older. And I take my I think by 7 or 8 years old, I take him to see the doctor, and he sort of pokes and prods. He says, "Yes, I think he'll have to go to hospital, Sean." I said, "Oh, okay, but we'll make a booking." He says, "No, now I'm going to make a phone call." and so I thought, this is a bit deja vu. I've been here before. And what was really nice was the people who were treating my son were people that I'd known from a previous life with a previous date who was a physiotherapist, but they were completely professional. And they just said, and one of them just came in. She was still a physiotherapist and really had nothing to do with, an acute surgical procedure. But they were just so nice and so kind that it really touched me that, people could just be so. And in the first hospital, appendicitis. And then in the later, the most dramatic case was I was in psychiatric intensive care for acute mania. And being a sort of bullheaded programmer type, I'd kicked up a bit of a stink. And so I got the SWAT team. I don't know if you ever had the SWAT team when you resist medication in psychiatric intensive care. A scrum comes out, pulls down your pants and sticks a dirty great big needle in your ass. And they put you in one of those things, and they put you in the cold cell. Like it was like being in the cooler in The Great Escape. I'm like Steve McQueen throwing the baseball around. And at that time, I decided that cooperation was a better response than resistance to the forces of psychiatric darkness. But then when I got out, there was a really lovely nurse who was just really sweet and really kind, and she had red hair and blue eyes, and was just kind, and said, "Well, Sean, you just have to mind your manners in here. You're a well-educated man, and you're quite smart. You'll figure it out, won't you?" And I said, yes, I will, nurse. And she was just very kind about it. And so I figured out the way to get out of psychiatric intensive care was to fake sanity, which I've been doing very well ever since. But yeah, so that was the three sort of empathetic occasions. But to me, empathy is just such an everyday thing. It's not like a special occasion. That's why it took me a while to think of those stories, because I thought empathy is just so quotidian. It's an everyday occurrence. Why do you say thank you? Well, imagine you're the person bored out of their brain doing a McDonald's job. Just say thank you and be nice. Costs you nothing. They might still be miserable and surly, but at least you tried. If they ever, because I started life with very boring jobs, and I know what it's like to have to do some menial, thankless tasks. So say thank you. Be nice, be kind. It costs you nothing, and it can get you, stand you by. So to me, empathy is, it's an everyday occurrence. But when the chips are down, it's kind of icing on the cake as well.
I think that's an important message, because everybody I ask has some stories that they can draw from. But I like the idea that you're underlining that it can be every day in small ways. And I really do fundamentally believe that if we all leaned a little further into our capacity, our natural capacity for empathy, we could really, really do a lot of good in the world. So I want to thank you for spending well over an hour having this conversation. I learned a lot. As I said, I feel like I feel a little more grounded in this conversation. So you've given me a gift, and probably some people who've been watching the series the same thing. I'll try to decide where I put you. Maybe at the very end. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. But thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. It's been very interesting.
And we'll see everyone, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation or found it illuminating, I hope you'll check out all the other episodes from this series devoted to empathy in the age of AI. And if you know someone who would enjoy the show, I hope you'll pass it along. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.